We are joined here today by a ancient Arcadian emperor. How are you, Carl?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you?
I'm very good as well. We're just talking offline about how it's finally cooled down just a little bit in the UK, so our fair skin can be have a bit of reprieve from the heat.
Yeah, thank God. Yeah. It's nice to
Uh,
have a summer, though,
it is
so I
nice to have
shouldn't
a summer.
complain.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's short, but it is welcome.
Hmm.
Now, you were one of the speakers last year,
Yes.
and I don't think you knew too much about what to expect when you turned up to the weekend. So, do you want to talk about your recollections?
I had a really good time. It was really interesting to meet such a plurality of viewpoints, which I think is something that many of your guests have mentioned, because there are a genuine plurality of viewpoints at such an event. I have to say, I met some really great people. It was nice meeting AA, of course, but it was also nice meeting people like Alexander Adams and various others who were just I didn't know about them before, but when I met them, they were I was instantly like, oh, this is a really nice person, and they're obviously really well versed. Like I really enjoyed talking to Panama Hat. I really enjoyed talking to like literally almost everyone there. Actually, I can't think of a person I didn't enjoy talking to. And it was very social in the evening. I watched one of the other interviews where someone was like, "Yeah, we didn't have very many autists," and if we did, everyone did a good job of hiding it. They were very sociable, very well groomed, very well dressed, very aesthetically appropriate, which I thought was fantastic. And the quality of speeches was generally very, very high, which is another feather in your cap. Very good event.
Do you have any particular favourites from last year that you can remember off the top of your head, or just in general
The
high quality?
yeah, I can't remember the chap's name now, but the guy who did the talk on architecture really resonated with me.
Edward Slingsby, I believe.
That was it. Yeah, I really enjoyed his talk. He had a very understated style, but what he was saying was very interesting. And I asked him if he would come on the podcast, but unfortunately he was like, "Oh, I don't want to, don't want anything quite that publicly facing yet." And so I was like, "Okay, fair enough." But he was very good, very good.
Okay, fantastic. And it's coming now. Only well, it's less than 2 weeks even to our event where you'll
Mm.
be speaking again. The theme this year is Logos versus Praxis, whereas the theme last year was where do we go from here. So the idea
Mm.
was last year we would decide roughly what our direction would be, and this year's more around how to get there.
Yeah, I didn't think we'd settled on anything.
Well, no. I think everyone came with a clear idea of what we
Yeah,
want, even if there was no concrete direction.
yeah. I think there is a general understanding of the direction to go in, even if the description of what everyone wants is kind of hazy. I think really what was underpinning it was a desire for belonging. Really, I think people want to belong somewhere, and I think that this speaks to the profound alienation that the globalist society that is squatting on our civilizations has imposed on us, and it is evident to me that this is something that we need to think about very deeply. One thing I will probably be talking about at the event is Anglo-Saxon poetry. I actually tend to read quite a lot of it. My copy of the extra books on the other side of the room, but I do tend to read quite a lot of it because it's really soulful. It speaks to another period in English history where the English were deeply dispossessed from their own civilizations. And I think there's a lot of power in the word English that we as the English need to be able to retake. You'll notice that in public life we very rarely use the term, right? It's always British this, British that, British the other, unless you go to Wales or Scotland, and then it's Welsh and Scottish. But the unspoken word that you never hear on like GB News or the BBC or anywhere like that is England. What is to become of England? And this isn't, as I was saying, the first time England has suffered a dark fate. And so while things look bad now, and I'm one of the people who spends a lot of time pointing out just how bad things are, so we're all aware. none of these problems are insurmountable. I had a conversation with Bo, the history bro, who works at lotuseast.com the other day, and I was getting quite down about all of this. He was like, I was saying, well, look at the state of our town, look at the state of Swindon, look at the state of everywhere. This is a dying, if not dead, civilization. We are in real trouble. And he was just like, it's not over. It's not over. And I was like, okay, all right. And that, for some reason, there was this conviction in his voice that really struck a chord with me, and it put me in mind of the Battle of Malden, actually. It's okay, there are defeats on the way, but it's not over. Nothing is decided. So it's really up to us to figure out what it is we are and what it is we want to be, and then find and articulate the voice with which to speak to the people who are oppressing us. And you can already tell that I'm sounding a little bit like someone from the left there. The conception is that there's an oppressed people here, and I think it might be true.
How much of the left are you still in frequent contact with?
0. They all hate me. I'm one of the most ardent critics. I mean, they despise me more than anything. I would love to talk to them at any point. Any leftist is more than welcome to send me an email, and I'll talk to them. But they don't want to talk to me. So.
And yet we're deciding perhaps to use some of their language and terminology.
Well, the problem is that this paradigm has taken over, right? The postmodern critical paradigm dominates everything. And you see it dominates the Conservative Party. I mean, the Conservative leadership is still going on, I believe. But you saw when the slate of candidates all announced themselves, every single one of them from an immigrant background proudly touted that they were from an immigrant background. And that's a very strange state of affairs. Like, that's peculiar, right? It would be weird for you to go to another country and say, I'm foreign, make me the person in charge. Well, that's just strange. That's just not the way in any other country you would think things would work. I mean, in America, you have to have been born in America to be the president. You can't even become the head of state, or in our case, the prime minister, but effective head of state, without having been born as a native. And yet, the Conservative Party is so Blairite. Peter Hitchens is totally right about the Conservative Party. It's so Blairite. They touted this as if it were a selling point, when in fact, I think to most regular British people, that would be considered a drawback. And it seems that they are essentially genuflecting to Blair's construction that is modern politics. And they do it without thinking about it. They don't realise that what they're doing is actually saying, my understanding of this country is questionable because I'm not really from it. I'm from somewhere else. And that's concerning to me.
Yes, I thought it was very striking in the Tory leadership debate where we had the hope of the right wing or the dissident right as well was placed on Kemi Badenoch, who is...
she is fantastic, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But it does speak volumes, as you're mentioning, that it's not Steve Baker. Right, Steve Baker didn't put himself forward. He instead endorsed Kemi Badenoch. And it's like, why, Steve? And we all know why. It's because you're a straight white man. That's why.
Yes, basically. But
everyone knows.
The people from migrant backgrounds or who can claim some oppressed status have an ability in our current year to speak truths which a straight white man cannot do in public office. So how do we counter that? Because I don't think we really want to say that's English, we're so oppressed. It sounds like a comedy skit.
Well, I think it might be true. That's the problem. I think there is active suppression of England and Englishness. And I think this is why Tommy Robinson in the English Defence League took such a beating from the establishment. They hated the fact they used the word English, even though it wasn't a racial issue, obviously. You had lots of Sikhs, lots of blacks in the English Defence League because there was a concern about the kind of civilization that was imposing upon English civilization. And the Sikh members and the black members were happy to live in English civilization. That's what they'd come here from. But there were certain other communities that did not wish to live within English civilization, and they were causing problems. So I think the key is that we have to stop being white. I know that might sound counterintuitive, but I do think it is about the way in which we conceive and project ourselves that is the key to overthrowing the dichotomy of the left. Because when they speak in terms of colour, they capture the conversation and make the framing of the debate automatically a loss for people who are not in charge, and they frame it in American terms. Suddenly, you are now somehow responsible for what powerful people in America are doing, for example. And this is just not the case over here, where, as we can see with the Conservative Party, a very large number of the people in charge, and I'm not even saying they're bad people, you've got to give a lot of the Conservative MPs their credit. Suella Braverman, Kemi Badenoch, and as you say, and others, they're actually quite solid and actually represent my values very well. But you can't say that they're white. And this is one of those things where it's you can't say, well, white people hold all of this power, because actually a lot of them aren't white. And so what's the issue here? And so it's not about white, because white is merely a property that inheres in our skin. What this is about the 1,000+ year continuation of a great civilization. And this is a very three-dimensional concept, whereas a skin colour is a very two-dimensional concept. And there's a lot to be learned from the poetry of our ancestors, I think, because they've been through this same process. And so we need to be able to articulate ourselves in a way that the left understands and respects. And actually one of those ways is as indigenous tribes. Now, I know that sounds a bit strange in the modern era, but I don't think you can deny that, for example, the Welsh or the Scots or the Anglo-Saxons, the English, are indigenous tribes of Britain. And if we have an authentic and sincere belief that that is the case, then we can actually construct our demands in such a way as to essentially fit the UN definition and framing of what an indigenous people is. And I think that puts us a step closer to being able to speak in a way that they can understand. Because a lot of the time, I think they don't understand. And we can observe the lack of Englishness in England as being something that is an attack on our tribal culture, rather than a way of framing in an American sense about a supremacist movement of whites or something like that. Because I don't think that's what people in this sphere are talking about. I don't think that that's what they're interested in. And I don't think that this is exclusive in the way that the left would have people believe. I think this is just a very effective tool. Because, and again, it's speaking to the way that tribes are conceived of, it's conceived upon a relational basis. And this, I think, is what you see most in Anglo-Saxon poetry. They never use the term race in any of these poems. They talk about kin. They talk about tribe. They talk about the people that they know and love. And these are not necessarily all English either. There are lots of examples in lots of medieval poems, actually, of foreigners coming in and being a part of the group, the fellowship, as it were. And I think this is really what Tolkien was trying to point out in Lord of the Rings. That, look, actually it's the sentiments that bind you and the moral connections that you make with one another that makes the thing what it is, and that's what gives it the value. And that is incidentally what a lot of the critical race theorists have identified in the concept of the tribe, and that's why they fetishize indigenous people so much. They view the sort of relational metaphysic of the tribe as something as being genuinely sacred. And I think that we have such a thing in England. And so it's about articulating this and showing the damage to this metaphysic that's been done by things like mass immigration. But it's not just mass immigration either. It's also the sanitization of language that has done this. It is the colonization of culture that has done this. I mean, you've seen like the Black Robin Hood, the Black, was it Henry VIII's wife? I can't remember which one it was. That, and it's like, why are you doing this? This is not about an attempt to authentically represent a genuine story. This is an attempt to take something from someone. It's like, okay, well, who are you taking it from? And the answer is, of course, they're taking this from the English. And so, okay, well, actually, the UN has literally got rules against propaganda that is designed to inflict psychological damage on indigenous tribes. They actually have statements and like guidelines and decrees or whatever it is, resolutions, sorry, that are against such things. And we may as well use them if they're there,
I think we're hitting on some potential synergies at this event here. So, mention a few things quickly. What we have Imperium Press books at the event. We'll be selling. They focus on lots of ancient European culture. We'll be selling copies of Beowulf, for instance. Mm-hmm. We have a poetry panel where you're talking about Anglo-Saxon poetry. So I'm sure they'll be discussing that sort of thing as well. And one of our other speakers, he's going to be talking about the concept of Rupert August, about the concept of a mythic restoration and King Arthur. So when you say Anglo-Saxon poetry, you mentioned Tolkien, obviously. Who are you thinking of?
Well, we don't actually know the names of any of the authors as far as I can tell. But I can tell you the poems that I'm thinking of. There's a poem called The Wife's Lament, which is very soulful. I mean, like, all of Anglo-Saxon poetry is very interesting, and it coincides very well with critical race theory, actually, because they deliberately take a subjective, personalized position in everything that they do. And this is very much what Anglo-Saxon poetry is about. Almost all of it is some kind of lament or dirge or expression of suffering, incidentally. Very, very little of it really, I think, at least from what I've read, is not about someone's personal interest. And so, like, for example, you've got the Seafarer or the Wanderer or the Wife's Lament, or was it Dior's Lament, Wolf and Iduasa. These are all very sorrowful poems about people who are suffering, genuinely suffering. Like Wolf and Iduasa is really interesting. It's very short, but it's clearly talking about a woman who has been taken and raped by someone, and how she has to bear this. And then you've got Dior's Lament, which again lots of them are about exiles, people who have been dispossessed. The Seafarer, the Wanderer, Dior's Lament, all of these are about exiles. And then you've got one called The Ruin, which is very interesting, which is about an Anglo-Saxon talking about what I assume are Roman ruins. He never explicitly says Roman ruins, but there is a feeling of a world that is passing by and crumbling and falling into ruin, and all you can do is learn how to bear your suffering. But in all of them, a constant theme are the memories of better times. It was not always this way. It was, and this is a theme of English life in general, and it always has been. It always used to be better. It used to be better in the past. We remember that it was better. And it seems that the Anglo-Saxon poems really are suffering something. And it's obviously the invasion of the Danes, so obviously that. But it's interesting that I've yet to come across one that actually mentions the Danes. This is always just the fate or the weird, or their doom that they're living through. But it's interesting how there's a constant theme of dispossession, and I think that people are feeling that now. Like you walk down your local high street, if you're in a diversified area, man, you feel dispossessed. There's, interestingly, right, there's in Swindon, of all places, a very conservative place, There's a Greasy Spoon cafe that's run by this Iranian immigrant, but he's been here for like 30 years. He's a part of the landscape. He's a part of the tribe. He's always been here. I mean, I've been here 20 years, and he's been here for much longer than I have. And I eat at this Greasy Spoon a lot because he has English bunting up along the front of the cafe. It's called Blues Cafe if you're ever in Swindon. Really good English breakfast. Really good. Traditional English breakfast. And this guy just likes the place, and he's always liked the place. And of course he grizzles about the new immigrants who have come because they don't care about the place. And then you see other shops, and I mean, I swear to God, I walked down the street today, and I took a photo of this building because just these two giant pride flags with this chevron on it. And I'm just like, this is disgusting. And yet the old immigrant who came here because he liked the place, has got this, got the English bunting up, and so now I'm going to his place. I mean, there's a good chance that shop was run by English people, but I'm not going in there. He just goes, sure, I don't really think of them as part of our tribe. They don't care about anything about this country. They want to genuflect to the current thing. So, right, screw you guys.
No, there's a similar thing near me where there's a local chippy, and of course they're run by Greek people typically, but they're very much part of the tribe, as you say. No one would consider them particularly foreign. When it comes to poetry again and English,
yeah, sorry, I got a bit off topic there, didn't I?
No, it's fine. There's been a long-term question to why the English did not produce great works of philosophy as the French and the Germans did, and the Spanish or the Italians even. And one of the viewpoints is that the English use poetry instead. And that the great works of English poetry were the creative intellectual outlet. That meant that we didn't have to produce our own cant. So do you think there's any weight to that? And if so, why do the English lean on poetry in a way that the Germans do not?
So I can't really speak to poetry from, say, like, the 1600s onwards, because I'm not in any way read on it. But I've read pretty much every King Arthur poem and Robin Hood poem in the Middle English, which takes a long time. So you've got to figure out, but you can translate it. It's just you have to work out what they're saying, and they speak in a pre-modern way, obviously. And so at first, what they're saying is garbled, right? But then you learn obviously you'll get translations and stuff like that, and you'll have notes in the thing from whoever translated it or whoever has transcribed it. But you can actually read it. It just takes time and effort to get the ear for it. And there is a great deal of moral philosophy in it. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is a fantastic lesson for young men. Right? You need to go on an adventure, but you need to be aware of certain things. You need to be doing it for the right reasons, and you need to keep your word. Lots of lessons like this. Interestingly, a lot of I can't remember the big King Arthur one. I can't remember the title of it now. But essentially, the message from that is everything foreign is kind of dangerous, and if you leave the homestead unattended, you might get backstabbed by Mordred. So be careful on that. And then the Robin Hood poems are generally about the right ordering of the world, and how corrupt bureaucrats, basically the corrupt sort of upper management, will do whatever they want if you let them get away with it, and so it's your job not to let them get away with it. And then the Anglo-Saxon poems are dirges, basically, projections of wounded souls. And so to get back to the point, I can't speak of any sort of, modern era sort of, the last 500 years or so of poetry. I actually have never read any of it. And I've never read any French or German poetry either. I'm not normally that way inclined. But it is a long-running critique of the English from, as you say, both the French and the Germans, especially, that the English are dumb and don't really think about the world. And I actually think that's a bit wrong-headed. It's not that we aren't dumb. We are, and that's fine. We are, as I spoke to a chap called Gunter, I can't remember his name now. He was a German diplomat who came on loads of theses. But he was like, yeah, he was like, no, look, the charitable way to put it is the English are intellectually lazy. And I think the consequence of this is because the English very much live in the world. Like, one thing that I notice very clearly from the Anglo-Saxon poetry is that they are Christian, but only for about an inch deep. They're very thinly Christian. They're like, okay, yeah, the transcendental Christian metaphysic of a God in heaven and in a world after this, brilliant. But right here and now, in this Middle Earth, things are really bad, and you can, the Christian morality is forever quite out of reach. The Christian worldview is just, it's slightly out of their reach, and there's something about that means that the focus is very much on the ground. And this is, famously the English being the empiricists of Europe, are happy to live with contradictions. I think that's what it comes down to. And English philosophy reading an English philosopher is like reading the meandering thoughts of an old man in his study. And that's very much, I've read loads, like Ernest Barker, like Bernard Williams, like any of these sort of like classic English philosophers that you would read in a philosophy course. You read them, and they've got like meandering thoughts. Whereas if you read a French philosopher, my experience is that they speak in these very smooth and flowing ways that don't. Honestly, I feel like the English philosopher is just taking a very long road to get to the destination, whereas the French philosopher is like slaloming down the same path, and the German philosopher is essentially trying to bulldoze a straight line through to the end and erase all contradictions. And this, I think, is very frustrating to the Continentals. I don't think they like the English acceptance of contradictions, because essentially we seem to be happy to let a contradiction not resolve and expect that that should be okay. And I think it comes from a kind of attitude that is very English, but I think also under the surface, in places in the continent, you get the same sort of attitude, sort of like the Bavarian attitude, the sort of like, old German, not the non-Prussian German, where they expect to have their little beer garden and to be left alone in it. I think this philosophy, this way of looking at the world, managed to take root in England, frankly, because of geographical convenience. England was a safe place. It's very difficult to invade England, and it's, for the last 1,000 years, it just hasn't happened successfully, with good reason. And so England has been in a good place for quite some time, and so that's allowed the English to feel secure and to breathe and to accept contradictions. Because to resolve a contradiction is to essentially impose something on someone else. You don't get the philosophy of tolerance from the continent. You get that from us. And we have that because we accept that, okay, well, that's his garden. I'm not going to mess around with it. But then this is my garden, and he has no claim to it either. So whatever contradiction is left unresolved, well, we're just going to have to work in our own lanes. This is definitely anathema to the German philosopher, and probably looks ridiculous to the French philosopher. But I think that's why we are considered to be intellectually lazy, because we're not pursuing the contradictions to their ultimate conclusions. But there are actually advantages to this, and advantages in stability, if nothing else. And it seems to be when we deviate from that path that we get instability. So that's why I think people think the English are stupid. And I think it's not that they're stupid. I think it's just, as this German doctor I was speaking to said, they're intellectually lazy, and I think it comes from security.
Yes, when you mention the Prussians in English, I immediately think about Immanuel Kant, who his writing was in a large part a reaction to Locke and Leibniz.
Oh yeah.
And Locke, of course, is one of these meandering writers you describe. It's full of contradiction. Kant was trying really to resolve lots of these contradictions within a Germanic framework. But if you read his work, he spends very little time actually dealing with the questions Locke poses, and ends up being completely obsessed with the German questions of Leibniz. And so it doesn't actually get at the core of the English question.
Well, one thing I think about Locke is that he had a foot in both camps. He because he had spent time on the continent, he was probably influenced by Spinoza, I believe, and so he ends up, and he admits this himself. He says that he is merely an under-labourer for what comes next, because he is definitely confused, but it's not his fault, because the ideas that he's dealing with are very new, and he's coming out of the English tradition, which is very old and successful. And so there's a way to do things traditionally, but Locke is trying to package these new ideas in that format, and it doesn't work. It has to be one or the other. So instead, you end up with Rousseau on the continent, and Locke essentially just leaving the field clear and saying, well, look, essentially, English liberalism is basically game theory. Like, it's just as Oakeshott put it, the distillation of English political tradition. It's just done this way in England, and so Locke kind of rationalises it, but he never takes it to the conclusion that he should take it to, which is what Rousseau and others complain about. And yes, you can see in Kant. I mean, Kant's a genuinely brilliant mind. Like, is genuinely scarily brilliant, and to take up and it's not just Locke's proposition either. This is the water in which the intellectuals of this sort of 200-year time period are swimming. But Kant does a brilliant job of cutting through much of it. But the thing is, I don't think that was good. I don't think that where he's going, the whole point being to liberate reason from tradition, I think, is the problem. I don't think that's wise, and I don't think Locke knew what he was doing, and he definitely didn't want things to end up as they were. But there was a chap called Berkeley who criticised Locke, saying, well, listen, right, if you have a self-animating universe, then you have killed God. And Locke was saying, nah, it's not going to happen, bro. And it's like, well, you did, actually. You know, we're not Christians now. Well, like, you know, I'm not. Lots of people aren't. This has happened. Anyway, so I'm rambling a bit now, but it's
no, so it's fine to ramble. You know, that's the English way, as you say.
well, that's the thing, and it's not that Locke wasn't brilliant either, right? Like, I mean, his essay on human understanding for its time, very, very good. But again, he was uncovering things that he didn't understand. It's not his fault that he didn't understand. And I don't blame people like Nietzsche for absolutely loathing Locke for his lack of intellectual rigor, but he was trapped in the English tradition. You know, and the English tradition is to accept the validity of things that are not rational. That's the problem.
The problem with the English tradition of accepting the non-rational in the modern world is perhaps that we live in an extremely globalized society where the traditions of the philosophical traditions of the continent and the Americas, which in large part inherited it, dominate. So how do you draw the English back when we have to live in this world where media is completely global and the political systems are global? How do you carve something out of that?
Well, I think it's important for us to note that the world has been conquered by Rousseau. Rousseau won. And it's because of the decline of Christianity, I think. The Republicans, for example, represent the Lockean view of liberalism, which is contingent on God being the progenitor of natural rights. But the French went full atheist and decided, no, you exchange your natural rights for civil rights. And so your civil rights are whatever the government says they are, which is the world we're in now. You know, we can very much see the government doesn't think there is what C.S. Lewis would call the Tao, I think, that exists outside of the state's control, to which we should be referring to find out these sort of moral questions. And so we have to concede, I think, that this is the final phase of the Enlightenment project. This is what the extreme rationalization, the sovereign rational becomes. And this is very, very clear that what Rousseau is doing with this as well. And he's not wrong. That's the problem. The problem with Rousseau is he is not wrong to do this. because in the absence of Christianity, we have made him right, and I don't know what we can do about it, because I don't think we're going to have a great Christian revival in which we can go back. I think there is only going forward. So the way I've been looking at it is saying, okay, well, look, if, as the postmodernists will say, is that our commitment to what I like to describe as the tribal gods of the English, which is the traditions that we have, the way things have always been done, the fact that we think free speech is important, the fact that we think limited government is important, the fact that we think personal freedom and responsibility within our communities is important. These sort of, the way things have been done, take on the aspect of English tribal gods in a kind of localized and relativized position. We are not talking about the universal rights of man, because no such thing exists by the standards that everyone has set out. For us to have universal rights of man now, we would need a universal world state to impose those rights on everyone. And since we don't have that, and since people's rights are different from state to state, we have only the sort of localized parochial rights of tradition. And we can... And the postmoderns will tell us, well, these are irrational prejudices that you hold, and so we to that should say, yes, these are our irrational prejudices, and those are your irrational prejudices, which they cling to with the Black Lives Matter and all of these other intersectional movements. Ultimately, and this again, I'll flesh this out more in the speech, I think, because I can give you the exact quotes from their own writings where they tell us this. They take on this positioned perspective and abandon the universal perspective. But as Bernard Williams put it, it's not irrational for us to adopt a human perspective. It's actually irrational to try and adopt a universal perspective. And so we can talk to our own parochial experiences and say, these are the things that matter to us. These are our rational prejudices. And when you say sort of, check your, you're being biased about it. It's like, okay, well, I check my biases and it turns out I'm in favor of them. I happen to like them, weirdly. And so I'm not going to give them up. And I don't see why I should. And actually, through your own logic, you can't provide me with a reason to give them up, apart from appealing to me having objective universal values. But if I've abandoned the position of having objective universal values because you undermined them, then I'm not compelled in any way, shape or form to give mine up.
To summarize then, would you say your dream is to use the lessons of postmodernism to weave or revive the English tale, take that to the UN and say, this is our indigenous culture, and because of this, we want to reject Rousseau, essentially?
I haven't got a grand dream or plan or anything like that, but I do feel that this might be fruitful. They are very convinced that moral knowledge is transmitted through stories, and I'm convinced of this as well. And it seems that if it can be done, if it is possible to preserve anything about our civilization to hand down to future generations, I don't see an alternate avenue. I don't see another way of doing it. And they happen to have the framework for that to happen. I mean, by the UN's own definition of a tribe, and by the US Supreme Court's definition of a tribe, the English actually do fit that definition precisely, because we actually are a tribe, and we have been for a long time. So I think it is possible that we could go and argue as such. And it's about making sure that the trappings of Englishness are self-evident. For example, if we have a guy doing that, we should probably get a guy with, I don't know, a regional accent and a flat cap to go in a tweed jacket and go before the Nigel Farage, basically, go to the UN and say, we are the indigenous people of England. And you're going to look at him and say, well, he's pretty English. Like, there's no mistaking him, and I think that can be done, because what we're in opposition to is a sanitized universalist culture that sees itself as the controllers of the world. And it's like, okay, they probably will become that. Are we going to overthrow them? I don't think the answer, at least in the immediate sense, is yes. I don't think we're going to overthrow the great wealth and power that has been accumulated by something like, the World Economic Forum or the UN or whatever. But maybe we can carve out a space within this paradigm for now to preserve what it is we want to preserve into the future. And so, when this paradigm's flaws manifest and it becomes weak and it cracks, then maybe we'll be able to break out of it and properly reassert our culture. But for now, I think that we can make essentially the same arguments that the Americans, the American minority communities have been making, because ultimately, the American project kind of is the globalist project. It's kind of one of the seeds of it. Sorry to tell you, Americans, and we can push back using those tools. Whether it's accepted, probably not. Whether it works, well, doubtful. But I'm actually not hearing any better ideas from anyone. So if anyone's got any, do feel free to send me a message or an email or whatever, because I'm all ears. But this is the best idea that I can come up with at the moment.
Do you own a tweed suit?
Not a tweed one, I'm afraid. I'm not rich enough. I'm not well. I come from more humble origins than owning tweed. I'm afraid.
Well, we have to find a way to look authentically English at the event anyway. As you say, we try and make yourself look good, and if you can present yourself in a very indigenous way, then we encourage that. And I'm glad.
I just want to point out that these aesthetics matter as well, because it is actually the lack of aesthetics that is what distinguishes the globalist civilization from the local civilizations, the particular civilizations.
Mm-hmm.
It deliberately sheds the local aesthetics in order to be able to appeal to any human anywhere, in any place, in any time. And that's not what we are. We are particular people who belong on a continuum of a civilization in a particular place and a particular time. And the word belong is important. We are a product of somewhere. We belong to something. And it's important that we make them understand that merely by looking at us. That's important. We have native tribal customs and a native tribal dress. And I actually... it was really weird. A couple of years ago, me and my son, when he was 5, I can't remember where we were, just in Bristol or something. And we walked past this we were in a market, and there was a shop that had traditional English flat caps. And he, for some reason, was just like, "Oh, Dad, I really want one of these," or "Daddy, I want one of these." I was like, "Well, how can I say no?" And so I've got a bunch of pictures of him on my Instagram in this little flat cap, and he looks so goddamn handsome. I was so proud,
Well, as you say, we do have a aesthetic we can draw from in this country, and some people have drawn it to great success. I'm thinking perhaps of Iron Maiden as one, which was drew on the English aesthetic massively and was extremely successful, partly as a result. But they didn't seem to get much critical acclaim or BBC attention, let's say. So there's that as a separate problem.
I wonder why.
Yes. Okay. Well, on that, I think we'll leave it, and we'll let you flesh out the final details of your speech to be given next weekend, actually, isn't it? So we're pretty close.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Pretty close now, guys. Make sure to get your ticket, and we'll see you all very shortly.